Alex was just a guy, fresh out of college, looking for a cheap place in a new city. He found it online, of course, an old house, a bit run down, on the outskirts of town. The listing said historic charm. Alex called it quaintly decrepit. It was cheap though, unbelievably cheap. That should have been his first warning, right? But when you're young and broke, unbelievably cheap sounds less like a red flag and more like a blessing. The house sat on a corner lot, half hidden by overgrown bushes and a couple of skeletal oak trees that clawed at the sky. Paint peeled off the siding like dried skin, and some of the windows looked like empty, judgmental eyes. Inside, it smelled like forgotten memories and damp earth. A faint, almost imperceptible sweetness hung in the air, a scent Alex couldn't quite place, but dismissed as old house smell. The floors creaked with every step, the kind of deep, groaning creak that felt less like old wood settling and more like the house itself was sighing. Or maybe watching. He moved in on a brisk autumn afternoon. The air had that bite to it, you know, the kind that promises winter isn't far off. As he unpacked, he heard things, not loud things, not at first. Just the gentle whisper of the wind against the windows, or so he told himself. The house breathed around him, a constant, low hum that vibrated through the floorboards. At night, that hum seemed to intensify. It wasn't electrical. It was something deeper, organic. He'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the house above him. It was heavy, oppressive. The first few weeks were uneventful, if you can call constant unease uneventful. Then things started to shift. Small things at first, insignificant. A kitchen cabinet door that Alex knew he'd closed, found slightly ajar in the morning. A picture frame on his bedside table, turned face down. He blamed himself. Must be tired, he'd mumble. Forgetful, but deep down, a tiny prickle of doubt began to form. One evening, he was in the living room, reading. The old house was quiet, save for the rhythmic tick-tock of a clock he'd bought from a thrift store. Suddenly, a sound. A faint, almost musical chime, like a delicate bell. It seemed to come from the hallway. Alex froze, book in hand. He listened. Nothing, just the clock. He shrugged it off, his imagination playing tricks. But then it happened again, softer this time, barely a whisper of a sound. He walked into the hallway, flicked on the light. Empty, nothing out of place. He checked every room, even the dusty, unused attic that always felt like it was holding its breath. Nothing. The cold spots were next. Patches of air, intensely frigid, that would appear out of nowhere. He'd be walking across a room, and suddenly, he'd step into a pocket of Arctic cold, like passing through an invisible door into a walk-in freezer. It was startling, almost painful. He'd jump, his breath catching, but just as quickly as it appeared, it would vanish. He tried to explain it away as faulty insulation, old house drafts, but the drafts didn't move. These cold spots did. They drifted, as if following some unseen path. Then came the smell, that sweet, rotten smell. It wasn't always there, but when it was pervasive. Like old flowers left to decay in stagnant water, mixed with something else, something metallic, like blood. It made his stomach churn. He'd search the house, frantic, looking for the source, a dead animal, forgotten food. He'd scrub every surface, light candles, open windows, but the smell would always return, an unwelcome guest, just when he thought he'd banished it. It clung to the air, a sickly sweet promise of something putrid just beyond his sight. He started sleeping with a baseball bat next to his bed. Not that he expected to use it, not really. It was more for comfort, a physical barrier against the creeping dread that was slowly becoming his constant companion. He tried to tell his friends, but he heard how ridiculous he sounded, even to himself. My house smells like death and has cold spots. They'd laugh, suggest he needed a vacation or a girlfriend. Alex just nodded, a hollow feeling growing in his chest. The whispers began subtly. At first he thought it was the wind, whistling through a crack in the window frame. Then he thought it was his neighbor's TV, bleeding through the thin walls. But the house was isolated, no close neighbors, and the whispers, they started to sound like words, not coherent sentences, not exactly, more like fragments just at the edge of his hearing. A name, perhaps, his name. Softly drawn out like a sigh. Alex. He began to question his own sanity. Was he overworked? Stressed? Was this what a mental breakdown felt like? He'd stand in the middle of a room, eyes darting, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound, the location of the cold, the origin of the smell. But it was everywhere and nowhere. It was the house. One night he woke up abruptly, not from a dream, but from an overwhelming sense of being watched. He lay still, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The air in the room felt heavy, like a wet blanket pressing down on him. His eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, and then he saw it. A shadow, not just a patch of darkness, but a deeper darkness, darker than the night outside, darker than anything he'd ever seen. It was by the door, tall and impossibly thin, almost two-dimensional. It didn't have distinct features, no eyes or mouth, but he felt it looking at him. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over him, pinning him to the bed. He couldn't move, he couldn't scream. His throat was a raw, dry knot. The shadow didn't move, it just stood there, watching. The whispers started again, this time clearer, colder. They weren't his name, they were something else. A language he didn't understand, yet he felt the intent behind them. Malice, hunger, and then a sound he would never forget. A low, wet scratching, coming from inside the walls right next to his headboard. It sounded like long, brittle fingernails dragging slowly over bone. Alex finally found his voice, a choked, pathetic whimper. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to make it disappear. When he dared to open them again, the shadow was gone. The scratching had stopped, but the air still hummed, thick with that sweet, rotten scent, and the silence was more terrifying than any noise. He didn't sleep that night. He sat upright in bed, baseball bat clutched so tightly his knuckles were white, staring at the door until the first faint rays of dawn bled through the curtains. The next day, Alex was a wreck. He walked around the house like a ghost, barely eating, barely speaking. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that he wasn't alone. He started researching the house's history online. Old newspaper archives, property records. It was tedious, and most of it was unremarkable, until he found an old forum, a local history buff site, with a thread dedicated to unexplained phenomena. And there, buried deep in the comments, he found it. A post from years ago, by someone asking about the old house on Elm Street, his house. The comments were fragmented, whispers of local legend. People had disappeared from that house, not just moved, but vanished. One family in the 50s, a single tenant in the 70s, another in the 90s, always after a few months, always without a trace. The police had investigated, of course, but found nothing. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Just empty houses, and then, after a few years, a new tenant would move in. The cycle would begin again. Alex's blood ran cold. He wasn't imagining it. This house, it was a trap, and he was caught in it. He decided he had to leave. Immediately, he didn't care about his deposit, his rent. He just needed to get out. He started packing, frantically throwing his belongings into boxes. As he pulled a stack of books from a shelf in his living room, something shifted behind it. A faint click. Curious against his better judgment, he pushed the books aside. There was a tiny, almost invisible seam in the wall, perfectly camouflaged by the old wallpaper. He pressed on it, and a small, shallow compartment slid open. Inside, nestled in cobwebs and dust, was a small, ornate wooden box. It felt old, heavy, and cold to the touch, even in his trembling hands. He opened it. Inside lay a single, dried rose. Its petals were a deep, unsettling black, not from decay, but as if they had been steeped in shadow. And underneath the rose, a locket. He opened the locket. On one side, a faded sepia photograph of a young woman, smiling, her eyes bright. On the other side, inscribed in elegant, looping script, were words that made his stomach drop out. Until we meet again, within these walls. Forever, as he stared at the locket, the sweet, rotten smell intensified, filling the small compartment, then spreading rapidly through the room. The air grew heavy, like a physical weight on his chest. And then the walls themselves began to hum. Not the low, rhythmic hum he was used to, This was deeper, louder, resonating through his very bones. The whole house vibrated. He heard the whispers again, but this time, they weren't fragments. They were clear, many voices, overlapping, indistinct, yet all saying the same thing, over and over again, from every direction, from inside the walls, from above him, below him. You belong here. You belong to us. Forever. The locket in his hand grew freezing cold, then suddenly searing hot. The photograph of the young woman in the locket began to change. Her eyes, once bright, slowly turned black, like the petals of the rose. Her smile twisted into a grotesque, elongated grin, her face thinning, elongating, her skin taking on the mottled texture of ancient, rotting wood. Her hair seemed to writhe, transforming into thick, coiling vines. Alex screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of pure terror. He flung the box and the locket away from him. It clattered to the floor, the photograph on the locket now a swirling vortex of black, pulling at his vision. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet, falling onto the floor. The walls around him started to pulse. He could see faint, swirling patterns in the peeling wallpaper, like blood vessels beneath thin skin. The house was alive. It wasn't just old, it was an entity, and it wasn't just a place where things happened. It was the thing itself. It consumed, it absorbed. The whispers now weren't just words. They were pleas, laments, screams of all the people who had ever vanished here, their voices distorted, woven into the very fabric of the house. He could feel them, pressing in on him, their fear, their despair, becoming his own. He scrambled to his feet, powered by a terror so absolute it eclipsed everything else. He didn't look back. He ran out of the house, leaving the door wide open, leaving his half-packed boxes, leaving everything. He just ran. He didn't stop until his lungs burned and his legs gave out, collapsing on the sidewalk miles away, gasping for air, shaking uncontrollably. Alex never went back to that house. He didn't even drive past it. He found a new place, in a brightly lit, modern apartment complex, surrounded by people. But he's not the same. He still hears whispers in the dead of night, even in the silence of his new apartment. He still catches faint whiffs of that sickly sweet, rotten scent when he least expects it. And sometimes, when he walks into a room, he steps into a patch of freezing cold air that lingers for a moment too long. He knows it followed him, or maybe a piece of it, a sliver of that malevolent house, clung to him like a parasite, a reminder that some places aren't just empty structures. They are hungry, they are sentient. And they don't just take your life, they take your sanity. And Alex, he's just waiting to see when it decides to finally take the rest. The house on Elm Street still stands, waiting, and its hunger, it never truly dies. It just patiently waits for the next lonely soul to call it home.